My name is Estelle Monroe. I'm 31 years old, and the moment my engagement ended didn't sound like heartbreak. It sounded like a conversation that had already been rehearsed. Calm, measured, almost reasonable. Adrian Clark is 29. He works in brand consulting, one of those roles where words matter more than facts, and the right phrasing can make anything sound acceptable. We had been together for just over 4 years, engaged for 9 months, living in my apartment, the one I bought before we met. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like mine and started feeling like something we were building together. At least that's what I thought. My life is structured by design. I work as a procurement analyst for a hospital network in Manchester. My days are spreadsheets, supplier calls, and people panicking when something critical doesn't arrive on time. It's predictable, controlled. Problems have solutions if you're willing to look at them clearly. I built my personal life the same way. Stable, reliable, intentional. Adrian was different. From the outside, he was easy to like, confident without being loud, articulate, always able to explain things in a way that made you feel like he understood more than you did. But there was something else underneath that, something I had noticed before, but never fully named. He didn't argue to understand. He argued to win. And when he couldn't win directly, he reframed the situation until it looked like he already had. Sophie Bennett had been part of that dynamic almost from the beginning. His ex-girlfriend. Except ex never really seemed like the right word. She was always there. Not physically, most of the time, but present in conversations, in messages, in the way his phone would light up late at night with her name. She had a way of existing just close enough to matter, but not close enough for me to justify questioning it without sounding insecure. So I didn't. I told myself I trusted him. The problem is, trust without boundaries isn't trust. It's permission. The night everything shifted was a Thursday. I remember the time because I was halfway through reviewing vendor confirmations for the wedding. Final payments were coming up, deadlines closing in. Everything had a timeline, a structure. Adrian came home unusually quiet, not tense, not distracted, prepared. That was the word. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, folded his hands like he was about to explain something complicated but necessary. And then he said it. I've been thinking a lot lately. About us, about the wedding. And I think, before we go through with it, I need to sort out some unresolved feelings. He paused just long enough for that to settle. For Sophie, there are moments when your brain expects a second sentence, a correction, a clarification. I waited for it. It never came. Instead, he kept talking, calmly, carefully, like he had already practiced this in his head. He said getting this close to the wedding had made everything feel very real, that he didn't want to walk into a marriage with unanswered questions, that what he was doing was actually responsible, emotionally honest. That phrase stayed with me, emotionally honest, like what he was proposing wasn't betrayal, just self-awareness. I remember staring at him, trying to find the part where he said he had already chosen me, that this was just closure, that it meant nothing. But he didn't say that. He said he needed time to spend with her, to understand what he felt, to see if there was something real there, or if it was just history. And then he added the part that changed everything. I need you to be mature about this, Estelle. This isn't cheating, it's clarity. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. Not angry, not hurt, just still. Because anger I could respond to. This required a different kind of response. I asked him one question. What does that actually look like? He leaned back slightly, like we were negotiating terms. I'll spend some time with her. Talk. Maybe see where things go emotionally. No pressure, no expectations, just understanding. Understanding. I almost smiled at that. He continued, explaining how adults should be able to handle complex emotions, how ignoring doubts was what ruined marriages, how this was, in a way, protecting what we had. And then, finally, he said it. If what we have is strong, this won't change anything. That was when I stopped listening to his words and started understanding what he was really saying. If he needed to check whether another woman was a better option, then I wasn't the choice. I was the placeholder. I closed my laptop slowly. The spreadsheet, with all our wedding payments still open on the screen. Venue, caterer, photographer, deadlines, numbers, commitments. All of it suddenly felt irrelevant because the decision had already been made, just not by me. I looked at him and nodded. I understand. The relief on his face was immediate, visible. He thought I was agreeing to wait, to stay, to be the stable option while he figured out if something better existed. He stood up, stretched slightly, and said he was going to take a shower. Like this conversation had been exhausting for him. Like he had done something difficult, but necessary. I stayed at the table, staring at the screen, and for the first time that night, I let myself think clearly. If he needs time to decide between me and someone else, then the wedding already has its answer. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I opened a new tab and started canceling everything. I started with the venue, not because it mattered most emotionally, but because it mattered most contractually. Their final confirmation deadline was in less than 2 weeks, and I knew from the paperwork that delaying would cost me more. I drafted the email in under 3 minutes. Short, professional. The wedding was canceled due to a personal change in circumstances. Please confirm the refund policy and any recoverable portion of the deposit. Then the caterer, then the photographer, then the florist. A few deposits were already gone. I expected that. Others still had partial recovery windows. My hands moved across the keyboard the same way they always did when something at work fell apart and everyone else panicked. Efficient, focused, detached. It would have looked cold to someone watching. But it wasn't cold. It was survival in a language I understood. The strange part was how normal the apartment still felt while I was doing it. Adrian's shoes were by the door. His half-finished protein bars were still in the kitchen cupboard. His jacket was still hanging over the back of one of the dining chairs because apparently chairs had become his preferred storage system months ago. Everything around me still looked like a shared life. Only now I could see the truth underneath it. Shared routines were not the same thing as shared loyalty. I sent the third cancellation email just before I heard the shower turn off. Then I closed my laptop, stood up, and walked into the bedroom. Our apartment isn't large. 1 bedroom, a compact living room, small kitchen, the kind of place that feels cozy when things are good and claustrophobic when they aren't. Adrian kept most of his clothes in the wardrobe opposite mine, though over time his side had spread in the way he always did. Incrementally, casually, as if taking up more space was something that just happened around him. I pulled 2 empty suitcases out of the hall closet, set them on the bed, and began packing. Not violently, not theatrically. I folded his shirts the same way I always did when we traveled. Sleeves in, flat seams, neat stacks, a navy sweater I'd bought him for our trip to Edinburgh last winter, a white button-down he wore to my cousin's engagement party. The charcoal coat he always said made him look more serious in meetings. Every item carried a memory. But memories are strange things. They don't disappear when someone hurts you. They just lose authority. By the time I had packed half the first suitcase, Adrian walked into the room wearing gray lounge trousers and a t-shirt, his hair still damp from the shower. He slowed in the doorway, towel in one hand, confusion spreading across his face, like he genuinely thought he might be in the wrong apartment. For a second, he just stared. Then he laughed once, short, disbelieving. "What are you doing?" I didn't look up immediately. I finished folding one of his jackets, placed it in the suitcase, smoothed it flat, and then answered. "You said you need time to explore your feelings for Sophie." He frowned. "Yes?" I zipped the side compartment closed. That sounds like something a single man should do. Silence. Not long, but long enough for him to realize I wasn't joking. His expression shifted first to confusion, then irritation. Not hurt, not guilt. Irritation, as if I had failed to understand the very generous, emotionally evolved arrangement he had just proposed. "Estelle," he said slowly, "don't do this." I looked at him then. "Do what?" "This." He gestured vaguely at the suitcases, the bed, me. "Turn this into some dramatic scene." That word, dramatic. He said it the way some people say irrational, childish, embarrassing. I went back to packing. Another sweater, 2 pairs of jeans. The black gym clothes he bought constantly and used inconsistently. "I'm not turning it into anything," I said. "I'm making the logistics match the decision." He let out a breath through his nose, already annoyed. "That's not the decision." "No?" No." He stepped into the room. "I said I needed space to understand what I'm feeling. That is not the same thing as ending our relationship." I pulled open the second suitcase. "It is for me." That landed. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened. Adrian moved closer to the bed, lowering his voice into that calm, persuasive tone he used whenever he wanted to sound like the only reasonable person in the room. "You are deliberately misunderstanding me." That almost made me laugh. Deliberately misunderstanding. As if there was a sophisticated angle here I was too emotional to grasp. I picked up a stack of his t-shirts from the drawer and set them inside the second suitcase. "I don't think I am." "Yes, you are." He folded his arms. I'm trying to be honest before we get married. That's what adults do. They confront doubts instead of burying them and letting them poison everything later. I nodded once. That sounds very evolved. His eyes narrowed. He knew sarcasm when he heard it, even when I kept my tone flat. Why are you being like this? I stopped packing for the first time and looked at him fully. Because you just told me you want to spend time with another woman and see if there's something real there before you marry me. That is not what I said. It is exactly what you said. No, his voice sharpened. I said I need clarity. I held his gaze for a second, then returned to folding a pair of chinos. You want clarity. I want self-respect. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The apartment was so quiet I could hear a car passing outside on the wet street below. Somewhere in the building, a door shut, the ordinary sounds of everyone else's evening continuing. Inside our bedroom, something final had already started unfolding. Adrian's frustration was more visible now. He ran a hand through his damp hair and paced once toward the dresser, then back. Do you honestly not hear how extreme this is? He asked. One difficult conversation and you're packing my things? I zipped the first suitcase closed. No, one impossible conversation. He stared at me. Then he switched tactics. That was the thing about Adrian. He almost never pushed in one direction for long. If guilt didn't work, he'd use reason. If reason didn't work, he'd use accusation. He adapted quickly, always trying to find the version of the argument that restored his position. Yeah, you're acting out of pride, he said. That's what this is, pride. You'd rather blow everything up than sit with one uncomfortable truth. I pulled one of his shoe bags from the wardrobe shelf and started placing his dress shoes inside. No, I'd rather end it cleanly than wait around while my fiancé compares me to his ex. He let out a quiet, incredulous laugh. You're twisting it. No, Adrian, I'm translating it. That hit harder than I expected. He went very still. Then his voice lost some of its polished control. You cannot seriously be throwing me out of the apartment tonight. I closed the shoe bag and placed it beside the suitcase. I can. Where exactly am I supposed to go? I shrugged lightly. That part isn't really my decision. You can stay with Sophie, or with your sister, or with one of your friends from work, but you're not staying here while you figure out whether I'm your future or your fallback. His face changed at that word. Fallback, because that was the one thing he hadn't expected me to say out loud. That's not fair. I looked at him. Isn't it? He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. You're making this uglier than it needed to be. I almost said something cruel. Something about how he had mistaken my silence for weakness for a very long time. But cruelty would have given him something useful, something he could point to later and say, see, this is who she really is. So I stayed calm. I'm making it honest. His eyes moved to the open suitcases, then back to me. For the first time, I saw something in him that hadn't been there before. Not remorse. Not exactly. Disorientation. Because in his version of this conversation, I was supposed to be upset, yes, but persuadable. Wounded, but available. Hurt, but waiting. The stable woman in the stable apartment with the stable life, holding her breath while he wandered into emotional ambiguity and returned when he was ready. I wasn't following the script he had built in his head. And men like Adrian never enjoy losing narrative control. Most people, he said carefully, would at least fight for their relationship. I lifted the second suitcase onto the floor and reached for his laptop bag. No, I said. Most people just wouldn't ask their fiancé for permission to explore someone else weeks before the wedding. The silence after that was absolute. He looked at me like I had slapped him. Maybe in a way I had. Not emotionally, just factually. I packed the last of what he'd need immediately. Charger, toiletry bag, the small leather notebook he carried everywhere and rarely wrote in. Then I walked into the hallway, set both suitcases by the front door, placed his laptop bag beside them, and came back for the small storage box from his nightstand drawer. Watches, cufflinks, random cables, loose receipts, the tiny private debris of daily life. When I returned to the hallway, Adrian was standing in the bedroom doorway, still not moving. Still waiting, I think, for the point where this turned into a bluff. I placed the box on top of one suitcase. Then I opened the front door. Cool air slipped in from the communal corridor. And finally, I stepped aside. You should go. He stared at me for several seconds. This is insane. No, I said quietly. This is very clear. He didn't move. Instead, he started talking again. Faster now, irritation bleeding openly into anger. I was overreacting. I was humiliating him. I was taking one vulnerable conversation and weaponizing it. This was exactly why honesty in relationships was so difficult, because immature people couldn't handle emotional nuance. I listened for maybe half a minute, then I interrupted him. The conversation is over? That shocked him more than if I had shouted. He kept going anyway. Said I was punishing him for honesty. Said I was trying to force a decision. Said a mature partner would have enough confidence to survive uncertainty. I held the door open. There is no uncertainty, I said. You created a choice. I simply removed myself from it. That was when his expression changed again. The anger stayed, but something heavier dropped underneath it. He was beginning to understand that I wasn't performing outrage. I was closing the door on access. He looked past me into the corridor, then at the suitcases, then back at me. Are you seriously ending everything like this? Yes. One word. No explanation, no speech. And somehow that seemed to infuriate him more than anything else. He muttered something under his breath, grabbed his laptop bag first, then one suitcase with a sharp, irritated pull that made the wheels catch on the threshold. He stopped once in the hallway and turned back toward me, waiting maybe for hesitation, for regret, for the scene to soften. It didn't. So he took the second suitcase too, and then he left. The sound of the building door downstairs closing a minute later was the only real signal that it was over. I stood there for a few seconds in the silence after him. The apartment felt different immediately. Not emptier, just quieter in a way that exposed the truth. I closed the door, locked it, and looked at the two parallel marks the suitcases had left across the hallway rug. Then I went to the living room, sat on the sofa, picked up my phone, and blocked him everywhere. I blocked his number first, then WhatsApp, then Instagram, then Facebook. Every place where a message could appear and reopen a conversation that no longer existed. It wasn't emotional. It was preventative. Adrian had a pattern. I had seen it before, subtly in smaller disagreements that never quite escalated, but also never truly ended. He would circle back, rephrase, soften his tone, introduce new angles until the original issue blurred into something else entirely. By the end, you weren't resolving anything. You were just tired enough to agree. I wasn't going to participate in that process this time. I set my phone down on the coffee table, leaned back into the sofa, and let the silence settle properly. No notifications. No background commentary about his day. No low-level tension I had stopped noticing until it was gone. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything from you. After a few minutes, I picked my laptop back up and returned to the vendor list. The venue replied first. Formal. Polite. Some portion of the deposit was non-refundable, but if the date was rebooked, I might recover part of it. The caterer was more flexible. The florist had a sliding scale depending on how quickly the cancellation was processed. I worked through each response the same way I would handle a supply issue at work. Assess, adjust, resolve. It took about an hour to send the follow-ups, confirm cancellations, and log what money was gone versus what could still be recovered. By the time I finished, the wedding no longer existed in any practical sense. It had been reduced to a series of transactions. Closed, archived, done. At some point, I noticed something else. My phone was still completely silent. That would have been unusual on any other day. Adrian used to message constantly, even when we were both at work. Complaints about clients, screenshots of conversations, small updates that didn't matter but filled space. Now nothing. Of course, I had already blocked him, but the absence still registered, not as loss, more like clarity. He wasn't part of my environment anymore. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Part habit, part the unfamiliar stillness of the apartment. Adrian used to move around early, usually narrating his own irritation before he even finished his first coffee. Something was always wrong. Emails, traffic, someone else's incompetence. The day started with friction. Now there was none. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop again. 2 more vendor confirmations had come through overnight. One asked if I wanted to transfer the deposit toward a future event. I declined immediately. There would not be a future event. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring. It stopped. 30 seconds later, it rang again. Same number. Then again. That was when I understood. Adrian. I declined the call and blocked the number. 5 minutes later, another unknown number appeared. Blocked. Then another. Persistent. That was always one of his defining traits. He didn't like unfinished conversations. Or more accurately, he didn't like losing control of when a conversation ended. By the time I left for work, I had blocked 3 different numbers. At lunch, I checked my email. There was a new message. Not from Adrian. From Sophie. The subject line was simple. We should talk. I stared at it for a second, then opened it. Her tone was polite. Careful. She said she believed there had been a misunderstanding, that Adrian was very upset about how things had escalated, that the situation between her and Adrian was complicated, but not what it looked like. Then she suggested the three of us meet. Like adults. I read the email twice. Not because I was considering it, because I wanted to understand the framing. In her version, this wasn't about a man asking his fiancé for permission to explore another relationship weeks before their wedding. It was a misunderstanding, something that could be clarified, smoothed over, managed. I closed the email without replying. There was nothing to clarify. The situation had already resolved itself. That evening, another email came through, this time from Adrian's sister, Emily Clark. Short. Direct. She said Adrian was staying with her, that things had gotten out of control quickly, that he felt I had overreacted and shut everything down instead of having a proper conversation. Then she added that he wanted to meet, to talk, to fix things. I read that message more slowly, not because of the request, because of what it revealed. He had already rewritten the story. In his version, he had been honest about complicated feelings, and I had responded by exploding, throwing him out, destroying the relationship. The part where he asked to explore another woman before marrying me was missing. Conveniently. I didn't reply to Emily either. Instead, I made dinner, ate quietly, and then walked through the apartment room by room, not out of emotion, out of adjustment. Spaces feel different when someone is removed from them, not just physically, energetically. Objects lose context. Corners shift. In the bathroom drawer, I found his razor. In the hallway, a pair of sneakers he hadn't taken. On the kitchen counter, a mug he always used and never washed properly. Small things, left behind in the rush. I gathered everything into a box, not angrily, not sentimentally, just methodically. If he wanted them back, he could arrange it through Emily. I wasn't interested in another direct conversation. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time I answered, not because I wanted to talk, because I was curious how far he would go. For a second, there was silence. Then his voice. Sharp, controlled. You blocking me everywhere is childish. No greeting, no hesitation, just accusation. I leaned back slightly against the sofa. How many phones are you planning to use? I asked. A pause. Then irritation. That attitude right there is exactly the problem. Of course it was. In his version, my refusal to engage was the issue, not his request. You took a normal conversation, he continued, and turned it into something extreme. You humiliated me, Estelle. You threw me out like I'd done something unforgivable. I let him finish. Then I spoke. You asked for the freedom to explore another relationship. I did not say that. You did. I said I needed clarity. I closed my eyes briefly, not out of frustration, just to steady the repetition. Clarity doesn't require access to two options at the same time. That made his voice tighten. You're twisting everything. No, I said, I'm simplifying it. He exhaled sharply. There was movement on his end, maybe pacing, maybe running a hand through his hair, the way he did when he was trying to regain control of a conversation that was slipping. Sophie already told me she reached out, he said. We can all sit down and talk, clear this up properly. Once you understand that nothing inappropriate has happened. I cut him off. If you need to evaluate another woman before marrying me, the engagement is already over. Silence. Then he started talking over me, faster now. You're being stubborn. You're refusing to fix something that isn't even broken yet. I didn't respond. I just ended the call and blocked that number too. For a few seconds, I sat there with the phone still in my hand. The apartment quiet again. No follow-up, no new call, no message. And something settled into place in a way that felt final. Not because he stopped trying, but because I stopped being reachable. After that call, the silence wasn't immediate, but it was different. The attempts didn't stop all at once. They slowed, like someone pacing back and forth behind a closed door, unsure whether to knock again or walk away. The next morning, there was one more unknown number. I didn't answer. It didn't call back. No emails from Adrian. No follow-ups from Sophie. Nothing new from Emily. It wasn't peace. It was distance. The kind that forms when someone realizes the usual methods aren't working. I went to work that day like everything was normal. Because structurally it was. Emails. Supplier calls. A delivery delay that needed rerouting. A procurement issue that required 3 separate approvals before anything could move forward. Real problems. Clear solutions. No emotional ambiguity. At lunch, I checked my phone out of habit. Still nothing. And that was when something unexpected surfaced. Not doubt, not regret, but recognition. Adrian had always relied on access. Access to conversation. Access to explanation. Access to the slow erosion of someone else's certainty. Without that, he had nothing to work with. And for the first time, I wasn't available to be worked on. That evening, when I got home, there was a message waiting. Not a call, not an email. A handwritten note slipped under the apartment door. I noticed it immediately because it broke the pattern. Adrian didn't do things like that. He preferred controlled environments, calls, conversations, settings where he could respond in real time. This meant he couldn't reach me any other way. I picked it up, turned it over once, then opened it. His handwriting was neat, careful, like everything else about him. Estelle, we need to talk in person. This has gone too far. You're making a permanent decision based on a temporary misunderstanding. Nothing has happened between me and Sophie. You're throwing away 4 years over something that hasn't even been acted on. I'll be nearby tonight. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Adrian, I read it once. Then again, not for emotion, for structure. Even here, the framing was consistent. Misunderstanding. Nothing has happened. You're making this harder. No acknowledgement of what he had actually asked for. No ownership. Just repositioning. I folded the note once and set it on the kitchen counter. Then I made dinner. Halfway through eating, there was a knock at the door. Not loud. Controlled. Measured. Of course it was. I didn't move immediately. The knock came again. Then his voice through the wood. Estelle, I know you're inside. I took a sip of water, set the glass down, and walked to the door. But I didn't open it. I'm not having this conversation, I said. A pause. Then quieter now, closer to the door. That's exactly the problem. Of course it was. For you, I replied. Another pause. Longer this time. You're shutting down instead of dealing with this, he said. That's not how relationships work. I leaned lightly against the wall beside the door. This isn't a relationship anymore. You don't get to decide that alone. I almost smiled. I didn't. You did. You just didn't phrase it that way. Silence. Then a shift in his tone. Less polished. More direct. You're overreacting. That's your opinion. You're ending an engagement because I was honest with you. No, I said calmly. I'm ending it because you needed to consider someone else before committing to me. That's not what I... It is, I cut in, still calm. You just prefer the version where it sounds better. The air on the other side of the door changed. I could hear it in the way he exhaled, in the way his voice came back sharper. Sophie and I are not in a relationship. I didn't say you were. Then what exactly do you think is happening? I didn't answer immediately, because the truth wasn't complicated. You're keeping an option open, I said, and expecting me to stay in place while you decide if it's worth taking. No, he snapped. I'm trying to make sure I don't make a mistake. I nodded to myself. Exactly. And I'm making sure I don't marry one. That landed. Hard. For a few seconds there was nothing. No argument. No immediate response. Just the quiet recognition that this wasn't a debate he could steer anymore. Then he tried one last angle. If nothing happens, he said, slower now, we could move forward. Stronger, without doubts. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. The part he truly believed. That I would still be there, waiting. Improved by the process. I won't be here, I said. Another silence. Different this time. Heavier. Estelle, his voice lowered. You're throwing away something real for... what? Principle? No, I said softly, for clarity. The irony didn't need to be pointed out. He heard it anyway. I stepped back from the door. This conversation is finished. He didn't respond immediately. And for the first time since all of this started, I heard something unfamiliar in the space between us. Not control, not irritation. Uncertainty. When did you decide this? He asked. I thought about that for a second. Not Thursday, not when he spoke. Earlier, quieter. I didn't decide it, I said. I recognized it. That was the last thing I said. He stayed outside for another minute. Maybe 2. No more knocking. No more arguments. Just presence. Then footsteps, fading down the hallway. And this time I knew. He understood. Not agreed. Not accepted. But understood that there was nothing left to negotiate. The next few days weren't emotional. They were administrative. There's a strange kind of clarity that comes after something ends cleanly. Not clean in the sense of painless, but clean in the sense that nothing is left unresolved. No open conversations. No unfinished arguments. No lingering what if that still needs to be explored. Just tasks. I finalized the last of the cancellations. The venue confirmed the date had already been relisted, which meant I'd recover a small portion of the deposit. The photographer kept the booking fee, exactly as outlined in the contract. The caterer refunded more than I expected, which I noted with quiet appreciation, but no real attachment. Numbers moved. Accounts adjusted. The wedding disappeared completely from anything measurable. After that, there was only one thing left. Telling people. I started with my parents. My mother listened without interrupting. That alone told me she understood something was serious. When I finished, she asked one question. What exactly did he say? So I told her. Not emotionally, just factually. He said he needed time to figure out his feelings for his ex before the wedding. That was enough. She didn't ask me if I was sure. She didn't suggest I reconsider. She just nodded slowly, like a piece of information had settled into place exactly where it belonged. My father was quieter about it. He said something simple. You made the correct call. That was all. No lecture, no analysis. Just confirmation. Over the next week, a few mutual friends reached out. Some of them had clearly heard Adrian's version first. You can always tell. They approach carefully, like they're stepping into something volatile. Their questions come wrapped in neutrality, phrased in a way that leaves room for both sides to be equally valid. I heard things got a bit intense. Maybe it was just bad timing? Relationships are complicated. I didn't argue. I didn't correct them aggressively. I just said the same thing every time. If your partner needs to consider someone else before marrying you, the answer is already there. Most people understood immediately. The ones who didn't matter. About 2 weeks later, Emily came by to collect the last of Adrian's things. We didn't invite each other in. We stood in the hallway, the door half open, the small box in my hands. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like she had been managing something chaotic for longer than she expected. Thank you, she said, taking the box. I nodded. There was a brief pause. Then she added, quieter now. Things didn't go the way he thought they would. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them, but she gave me enough anyway. Sophie isn't what he expected, she said carefully. And now everything's just complicated. Of course it was. It always is when something built on uncertainty is forced into reality. I held her gaze for a second, then nodded once. I hope he figures it out. I meant it. Not kindly. Not cruelly. Just neutrally. Emily studied my face like she was looking for something. Resentment, maybe. Or satisfaction. She didn't find either. After a moment, she gave a small nod and stepped back. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't ask what she meant. We both knew. I closed the door after she left. The apartment was quiet again. But this time it felt different than it had that first night. Not like something had been removed. Like something had been restored. Over the next few days, I made small adjustments. Moved things back to where they had originally been. Cleared space that had slowly been taken over. Reorganized the wardrobe so it reflected one life again, not two overlapping ones. There were moments where memories surfaced. A jacket that still smelled faintly like his cologne. A drawer that felt emptier than it should. But memory doesn't carry the same weight when clarity is stronger. And clarity is quiet. Sometimes people ask if I regret not trying harder. If I should have talked more. Waited. Given him the time he asked for. I always answer the same way. No. Because the question was never whether he would come back. The question was why I would stay while he decided if he wanted to. Adrian said he needed time to figure out whether another woman might be the better choice. I simply made sure he had all the time in the world to do that. Just not as my fiancé.